Hello, this is Paolo and welcome to the fourth installment of the Blender Survival Guide. Now, before we get into the tutorial, let me just say a quick word of thank you to all of you who posted excellent, wonderful feedback on the Cow forums or my own blog. It's very nice, it's very good to know that these tutorials are actually useful to some of you. And if you find them useful, please spread the word. Tell your friends, tell everybody, tell people who are using Blender where they can find some good information. All right, last time we left off at this point where we have some nice 3D text. But there is a problem with this. We use just a default font. Now, the default font looks fairly good, but chances are that you are not going to use exactly the same font every time you need 3D text. So now let's see how we can change the font for our 3D text. We go to the editing buttons with the text selected, right-click as usual. And here in the font section, you can see that we have the current font shown, which is built in. If you click on the drop-down box, there is just one option, that is the built-in font. We can load any additional font that we want with this button. So before we do it, let me just make a confession. As you see, I use a Macintosh system. I haven't used a Windows machine in a long time. So I don't know, I don't remember where the fonts are installed under Windows. But I assume that if you're using Windows, you know that. So follow what I'm doing here, and you'll be able to apply the same idea for the Windows setup. So we click on the Load button, and our now fairly familiar Blender File Manager pops up. And the first thing that we need to do is basically to point to the location where the font files are installed. Blender will use any TrueType or OpenType font that you have installed on your machine. You click on the directory path, and under Macintosh, all the fonts are installed under Library Font. You press Enter, and the content of the directory will be shown. The files with the little square next to the name are the ones that can be used by Blender. So, we can choose any of these. For example, I don't know, let's see, we want to use a Garamond. Let's try this one. And we click on the name of the file, which makes it appear here, and then we click on Select Font. And as we can see, the font already changed. So now in our drop-down list, we have the built-in and Garamond Premiere Pro. Okay, so this is one text. I was looking for something a little more computer-esque, and there is one font that I like a lot. Let's click on Load again, and of course, Blender will remember the original path. And let me just scroll all down to the bottom of the list to a font called White Rabbit. This is, of course, a reference to Knock Knock Neo, follow the White Rabbit, the Matrix 1. And click on Select Font, and again, our 3D text changed. Of course, it's too big now. There are a couple of issues here. Let's fix them. First of all, it's too big. So even from this window, which shows our camera view, we press S for scale, and just scale it down till it fits the frame nicely. Now, one thing I see here is the distance between the O and the E is just too compressed. So again, in our font properties, we can change this. Now, as you can see, there are a few pieces of the UI that are kind of overflowing. This is because I'm switching back and forth from my high resolution to the lower resolution for the tutorials. When this happens, though, just right-click on the window and select vertical again, and Blender will resize the window. It will resize the controls for you, and you can rearrange things so that you can get a little more real estate. So here, with the text selected, I can change the line distance, for example. So I can click on this. Okay, and that looks better to me. Okay, so let's do a quick render. We press F10, and here we are. That looks kind of interesting. Now, it looks a little artificial to me, a little, I don't know, just too computer-esque. So let's close this window and start messing around with the materials. So again, we keep the text selected and we click on shading. Now the text, like any other object, normally doesn't have a material already attached to it. The material is a piece of data that describes how an object is represented in the environment, what kind of material it has. Could be something as hard as concrete or metal. If it's metal, it can have some highlights and a specific type of highlights. Take a look at the objects around you. If it's glass, of course, it's transparent, it's partially transparent. It can have a color like a glass bottle, and there are other options like reflection and so on. By default, Blender will not assign a material to your object. It tries to be conservative so that we don't use memory if it's not required. But we can create a new material anytime we want. So with the object selected, we click on Add New, Links and Pipeline. Why it's called the Links and Pipeline? Because basically the concept is that you can create a material. Now the material is an entity of its own. It describes how a material reacts with light. Now you can attach that material, you can link that material to multiple objects. So you can have one material, let's say it's glass. If you have 15 objects in the scene, like glasses and bottles, that need to be of the same material, you don't need to redefine the same material 15 times. You define it once, and then you link it to the object. Now, if we are in this situation where we are selecting an object and there is no material, we just click on the Add New button will create a new default material, and it will automatically link that material to the object that is selected, in this case, our text. So let's click Add New. And a whole series of buttons just showed up. Well, here we have our preview. Here is our material name. It's called material. So the important concept here is, as usual, take baby steps, one thing at a time. Let's focus on just the essential, just what is needed right now. What I want to do is to generate some good text, some good looking text that has a little more 3D look, a little more realistic without being hyper realistic. And I don't want any coloring, I just want some flat white text. So the first thing is I'm going to look here under color, which is the diffuse color. The diffuse color is the color that an object has, basically the color that is reflected by the light hitting the object, and it's called the diffuse color instead of being the specular color. The specular color is the color of the highlights. If you look at this preview, that is very white. So what I'm going to do here is to just create a white object. So I'm clicking on this swatch of gray color, and I'm going to move my cursor all the way to white, where we can see the color in different representations, RGB, which is 1, 1, and 1. This is the equivalent of the integer notation 255, 255, 255. Some systems use a 0 to 1 notation, others use a 0 to 255. This is a fractional value. As you can see, I can move the red cursor, the red slider, and I'm getting a 0.477. And you can see the hexadecimal triplet, which is used, for example, in web pages using CSS. And this is the hue, saturation, and value here in this other notation. So you have your choice. But let's use white for now. I press enter. Now it's white with the, actually it's slightly pink. Well, I must have just clicked on the wrong button at the last second, but I can change my value even here, which is another very convenient way of setting the color. Okay, let's use white. Let's see with another render, F10, which is actually showing that we don't need to switch to the scene panel to do a render. We can press F10 any point and have a quick test render. Okay, the text is in fact whiter than before. Let's close this window. And I still don't get the effect that I want. I don't get the drama that I want. So you know what? I think I'm gonna add one light. I want to have a little bit of backlighting. So let me just click here with the left click because I want to move our 3D cursor, which is here. I'm gonna bring it down a little bit. Okay. So from this view, for example, I can press Shift A. And I'm going to add a new spot. All right. Let's switch to the side view. There you go. Let's come a little closer. Here is our text. Here is our new light. Right click on the objects. Let's move it up a little bit. And rotate. R, move the mouse. And let's have it, pointing up like this. I want to move it down again. Original position was more right. From here, I'm not sure if I'm looking at the positioning of the light correctly. So let's switch to a top view. Okay, not quite what I wanted. So, for example, we can see that the cone is not covering enough. So I'm going to bring this light back a little bit and then rotate it from the top view, again R, and we move it like this, and maybe down a little more. And like I did before, I want to remove the shadow for this light. So I'm already here in the right panel. And I'm going to click on the buffer shadow button just to disable it. And let's do a quick render now. Ooh, see these highlights here? I like them a lot. This is just what I wanted. Just the added, it's a little more dramatic. It has a little 50s flavor to me, even with the modern font. I like it a lot. One thing I want to do is, though, to reduce the size of the frame, just because it's taking too much. And also, when you do test rendering, if you can keep the frame smaller, it will take, of course, much less to render. Now, without messing around with our frame settings, there is a quick one-button way of doing this. We go to the scene section here, and see here in the render section, in the render tab, there is a button that gives me the size of the rendered frame. 100% is by default. I want 50%. So my dimensions here don't change. It's 1280 by 720. This is what I want as my final render. But here, I have one button option to just say, look, for now, just render half the size. And let's try it again. F10. There you go. Very fast. It took 0.29, so basically 0.3 of a second to be rendered. Just what I needed. Perfect. All right, let's try some other options. Maybe white is not quite the color we want. Let's try something different. Select the text. Click on the shading button. In our material, let's try, maybe a nice shade of blue. Something like, see, here is the square of the color that we are selecting. Something like this, very cold blue. Let's see how that looks. And here is in our view. That's kind of nice. Now, one thing I don't like is this blue background. If you didn't notice before, you might just ask yourself now, why there is a blue background? Why it's not transparent or black or white? Very good question. Well, in order to answer that, take a look at this. We move this, when it's too small, when the window is too small to show all the buttons, you can slide the menu, the header, by clicking on the middle click of the mouse and dragging. Okay. So here I'm in the material button. Now for each button here, there can be some sub buttons. It's like tabs and sub tabs. For example, when I click on the object, I have parameters for the object selected. Then I can also activate the physics button and the particles buttons. Yes, we have 3D particles, of course. But these are the three options for the object button. When I click on the shading button, I have, as we saw before, the lamps button when we select a lamp. But look at this, there is a world button. And the world button is basically the sub-tab that holds parameters for the world. The scene exists in what is a kind of a universal, a world of its own. Now, if I click on the world, you see here we have this blue sky, which is exactly what renders as a background. Now, I could change this, but there is an easier option. We can just leave it alone and just say, don't use it. That is the meaning of the action I'm going to show you. So let's click on the scene button again, and the render layers here up next to the output tab. We have all the options for what needs to be rendered for this current layer. Right now we have only one layer of rendering, so let's keep it simple. But look at this. Definitely we want to render solid faces. This is going to be generally always on. Halo, I don't need it. Sky, that is the sky that we just talked about, I don't need it. Edge, not for this. And strand, definitely not for this rendering. By disabling these things, you're keeping things a little simpler, a little faster. Now, if I re-render this, there you go. Now, our sky is gone. There is a black background that is basically transparent. If you're rendering this frame as an image file with an alpha, and you're using the RGBA option right here that we set up when we created our environment, then this black will be actually transparent. And if you are here with the render window selected and you press A, you see your alpha channel, which is very useful. Okay, so now we have changed the text, now we have changed the background. I want to make this render a little more realistic. There is a very, very quick way of creating more realistic 3D text, which is great. You've seen it in several commercials on TV. Every time they use 3D text in the scene, like at the beginning of Fringe or doing some Fox commercials for their animation block, you see that effect often. It's called ambient occlusion, and ambient occlusion is basically simulating the shading, the darkening that is happening when two objects like these are close by. Now, if you look at, just look around in your room and look at the corners of your room where the two walls meet, you'll see that basically right there at the corner there is a darker area. That is basically what ambient occlusion recreates. So Blender has a excellent ambient occlusion control. It's just a little hard to find. So let me show you where it is. We need to click back on the shading buttons and basically click on the world button. If you were trying to find the ambient occlusion together with the material for your object, then no luck there. You need to click on the world button, the one that we just saw before. And we're going to ignore everything. Let me actually resize a little bit this better. So we are going to ignore everything except this little tab here, ambient occlusion. And let's click on this. And again, you have to appreciate the Spartan attitude of Blender, because a program of this complexity, if it had everything turned on, basically it would take forever to do anything. So ambient occlusion, it's in a tab and it's disabled by default. So click on the big button here and now we can see all the options. Now there are two different ways of creating ambient occlusion. One is ray tracing and one is the approximate method. Now I know that you heard about ray tracing often and that seems like a good idea. Well, let me show you why it's not. So right now I have my ray trace ambient occlusion and let me just turn on both the lighting and darkening of ambient occlusion. Otherwise, normally it only adds. I like actually this option better. And let's do a quick render. F10. And now we see what I mean. See the darkening here, and here, and here. And I know what you're thinking. Okay, that looks kind of interesting, but it is so grainy. And it's true. Because ambient occlusion can be applied to certain degrees. And the more precise calculations you perform, the more time it takes. So from the 0.3 of a second, now we are at 2 seconds, 0.57. So it's almost 3 seconds. Big increase. Now, and this is with a crappy ambient occlusion. If we really wanted to have this better, then we need to increase our samples. And I estimated we should probably go up to 10. Now, if I do a render at this point, and keep in mind, this is an 8-core machine. It's a very fast machine. It's running 16 threads at the same time because of the hyper-threading. Our time went from 0.3 seconds to 9 seconds and 46. So a big, big increase. But it is definitely worth it. We see now the darkening next to the letters. It looks more realistic while not trying to be lifelike. But it's definitely something that we could add to a piece of footage. So now let's see the other option. If I switch to approximate, now I have a different set of options. Now let me give you the settings that I consider correct for this kind of rendering. Use fall off always. And I would add one pass to reduce the over occlusion, otherwise it becomes too dark. And now let's try. So our all-time was 946 to 69. We still have a nice subtle, very subtle. Look at this. Look at this area here. That is nice. Now we can decide if we want to remove the additional pass and see how much darker it is. It's a lot darker. If you like in this way, it's okay. I think it's a little too dark for me. And so here, 2 seconds, almost 3 seconds. This is definitely doable. But there is another option too. Pixel cache. Let's turn this on and see if we gain anything. We gain a little bit from 286 to 226. And the result looks fairly much the same. Now, I'd like to get this a little darker without the additional pass. It looks too dark to me. So we need something in between. I can try to change the strength of the fall off, or I can just reduce the energy. So let's take a look at this. Let's go to 0.8 and do another render. Seems a little better. Let's bring it down a little bit more. I click directly on the number and I'll type 0.7. At this point, I think I like it. I like it the way it is. So let's keep it this way. Maybe we can move the lights around a little bit, but this is good. Close the window, and now we have the option for creating nice ambient occlusion. And you can play with this. You can play with the other parameters. We can look at those in another tutorial. But for now, this is, the essential ambient occlusion without being clobbered by the ray tracing. So I hope this lesson was useful. It's a lot of material again. These are becoming pretty dense, but we are not done yet. So I'll see you on the next video, the Blender Survival Guide Part 5. Don't miss it. See you next time.